From our Maritimes News Center, this is CTV News at 6.
You know, at one time or another, it seems all the major social media platforms come under scrutiny or under heavy criticism, but for the most part, that seems to blow over fairly quickly. That has not necessarily been the case for TikTok, though. The video-based platform happens to be based in China. U.S. lawmakers especially are worried about the company's connections to the Chinese government, and they're concerned enough to limit its usage in the United States, a move that's kind of largely unheard of in a place that prides itself on rights and freedoms. Joining us tonight with some insight on the debate, we're pleased to welcome the CEO and the founder of Beck, a technology management firm based in Riverview, New Brunswick. Scott Beck, nice to see you again. Thanks for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Is Beck Tech on TikTok? And I just asked that because it's fun to say.
It's an interesting question. The answer is no. About 2 years ago, I started talking about the dangers of TikTok and what it was doing on people's phones and the information it was gathering. And here we are 2 years later, and the U.S. government is starting to talk about it as well.
Okay. I want to back up just a little bit, make sure everybody understands. For people who don't know, what is TikTok? How is it used? What kind of platform is it?
It's a social media platform. You download it onto your smartphone, your iPhone, or your Android phone, and it shares cute little videos and pictures. It's very addictive, and it's got billions of users around the world. I mean, this thing is taken off like wildfire. The problem, and what they're starting to talk about, is security folks have started pulling apart the software, and this thing is gathering a lot more information than people realize. Keeping in mind that this is supposed to be showing us videos, it's also turning on our microphone. It has access to our cameras. It's looking at our calendars. It takes a look at messages. So if mom or dad are sending you a message, TikTok can read that as well. And that's where the concern comes from. You know, if you think back to the old days of espionage and counter-espionage, you'd have to have feet on the ground to be spying. Well, guess what? With TikTok, you don't need humans. It's doing it, and we're putting it on our phones ourselves.
We're willingly
doing it.
Sure, willingly downloading it. And the company that owns it has close ties to the Communist Party in Beijing. Is that correct?
It sure does. Now, it was founded independently by an entrepreneur in China who stepped out about 2 years ago, and they've spun off another company that's actually owned by the communist government for the Chinese part. But when you start looking at a communist government and a business there, how far apart is it really? And one of the concerns that TikTok keeps saying is, hey, we keep all of our data in the U.S. or in Singapore. It's not going to China. Well, unfortunately, the security folks, when they started pulling apart, see that it's actually making calls back into China. So what information is going there, we're not 100% sure, but it certainly is still talking to China.
Now, the U.S. Senate has now passed a bill prohibiting TikTok from being downloaded onto any U.S. government-owned device. It kind of feels like that's more of a token move than a practical move. Am I right about that?
You are, because let's think about it. If I've got a government-issued phone, chances are I've got a personal phone as well, and I've probably put it on my personal phone. So the goal of trying to limit this would be to make sure that TikTok's not listening to a microphone, isn't looking at the GPS, isn't inside the Pentagon listening to messages and sending it back to China. But if people have personal phones, still there.
Doing it anyway, for sure. So we know some U.S. politicians, particularly high-profile Republicans, are pushing for a full-fledged TikTok ban. Do you think that would happen? Do you see that happening?
It would be really hard at this point. I mean, the cat's out of the bag. As I said, there's billions of users around the world. To try to pull that out of the App Store to stop new installations, probably. But I'm not aware of any way to go pull that software off everybody's personal phones, nor would you think it'd be legal for a company to be able to do that? Because we agreed to allow it on our devices.
Sure.
So who's to then come in and take it off of our devices? So they could stop it potentially from new installs, but the cat's out of the bag, as I said. It's already out there.
Yeah, can't put it back in the tube. So what about this country? We know there have been tensions between Beijing and Ottawa. Should we be kind of reconsidering TikTok on this side of the border?
Truth is, there actually are. There has been discussions about this at a very high level, and they're kind of following the American lead on this. And the Americans, because we are so tied to them militarily and many other intelligence gathering ways, they have some influence over this as well. So the Canadians are watching this. The Prime Minister has said that they're keeping an eye, and they'll take all necessary steps that they deem reasonable. So it's certainly not flying under the radar. It's being watched. But how do you put the tube back into the toothpaste back into the tube?
Where do you see this going? How will this play out in your mind? Well,
the Americans are trying to get this company to diversify itself and have an entity in a non-communist friendly country. Now, that's a pretty high-level business game, and I don't know exactly how you'd still get that separation, but that's one of the things they're talking about is, hey, leave China, keep the data out of China, and we're all into it. And this is something they've been floating around for 2 years. I'm just not sure how that would play out.
Okay, just while we have you here, I want to ask you a few quick questions about Sobeys. We actually got a number from the company yesterday. They say that the alleged breach they experienced has cost them $25 million. So far, this is after insurance. Does that number seem reasonable and accurate to you, $25 million?
It does. Sadly, with ransomware, we've come a long ways from 9 years ago when it first came out. It was like $49 to fix it. The requests, the demands for ransom are now into the multi-millions. There's actually a cottage industry of trying to negotiate that number down. But if you stop and take a look at the city of St. John, that didn't have as big a foothold as Sobeys, they spent well over $3-4 million that we know of recovering. So at Sobeys, at its scale and how big it is, that number kind of plays out.
To be fair, though, Empire hasn't admitted that this was a ransomware attack, although lots of sources seem to think so. Does that surprise you, or would you expect Sobeys to continue to deny that? Because I've heard arguments for both ways.
So there's two lines of thought. One is you be very open and honest and get in front of it for PR purposes, and the other one is you shut up and don't admit anything, hoping that it's going to blow over. The problem they have is pictures have come out alleged from staff that took pictures of the screens that showed the ransomware message. This got shared out on the internet. It's pretty clear that it was ransomware. I mean, I did not personally see the message, so I can't tell you 100%. But it's certainly alleged, and we've seen the pictures, so it certainly looks like it. You know, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Most of us seem to believe that we're going to be seeing more and more of this going forward. So how do we combat it? How do we fight this kind of thing?
Well, here's the sad truth. The bad guys have been winning because we haven't been talking about it. Most businesses think this can't happen to them. Right. We're too small. They're not interested in us. But the bad guys have figured out two things. One, everybody's susceptible to it. Nobody's too small. They're just too small for the news. Empire, big enough, big impact. The second thing is bad guys have figured out that, for sake of argument, let's say they don't care about your data. They do know who does care about that data, you, and you're probably willing to spend money to get it back. Right. And that's why this thing just keeps growing and growing and growing, because we haven't been taking it very seriously, and it's been very profitable for the bad guys.
Scott, we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Always appreciate your insight.
It's a pleasure. Thanks.
Scott Beck is the CEO, the founder of Beck Tech, a technology management firm based in Riverview, New Brunswick. He joined us tonight to talk TikTok and Sobeys. Stay with us. We'll be right back.